Well, good morning. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about empathy. This is a subject that comes up a lot, whether it's vocalized or not, and is one of the defining factors between people that are awake, people that are partially awake, reptilian consciousness, and people that are awake and activating. Empathy is all about being able to feel what other people are feeling, and this takes many different forms. I'm going to start listing some forms of empathy off the top of my head. So we have emotional empathy as one of the really common forms of empathy, and this is something that we can see pretty much universally in the animal kingdom, even in the plant kingdom, where we literally experience in our emotional body the emotions of someone else's emotional body, and this differs from an emotional reaction in that we are not seeing an event and then having an emotion unconsciously. When we are displaying emotional empathy, we are witnessing someone experiencing an emotion and choosing to activate our emotional body to experience that with them. So this is basically like being present with them within our emotional body. This is something that we naturally want to do, but we've been conditioned to not do because there's so much pain and suffering being intentionally caused that if we just opened up our emotional empathetic body the way that it's supposed to be open all the time, we would just be flooded with the horrors and the atrocities. We would just be, frontline witnesses to the brutality that is experienced in every moment. I'm briefly going to touch on the fact that we live in a slave system. It's primarily run by emotional control. They have tricked people into being very, very mean to each other and to consider this normal. So it is not normal to be mean to each other. This is not typical of human behavior. This is behavior of humans that have been shut into a dark room in a box, deprived of what they needed, prodded and tortured and basically conditioned into believing that life is darkness, pain, and suffering. So humans absolutely do not believe this. They've just temporarily been confused into accepting something that's absolutely not true. So emotional empathy is really, really common, and we all have it. And this is one of the big defining factors between a reptilian consciousness, which is a partial awakening to the second chakra, not to personal power, not to the third chakra, of lacking empathy, because a partial awakening to the reptilian consciousness says that I see that everybody has emotional needs, so I'm going to try to control everybody for my benefit based on other people's emotional needs. I'm going to let my emotional need to try to control, not to control myself. I'm going to bypass myself. I'm going to remove myself from the equation, separate myself from the whole, and try to instead just take from other people's emotions. This is a partial awakening. So emotional empathy. Then we have intellectual empathy. So intellectual empathy is when we imagine what someone is going through and we decide that we will take courses of actions or say words that will be in support or in some way facilitate or aid someone else's emotional process. Or maybe just not get in the way. Maybe if we see that someone is having a really bad day and is being a little crude, intellectual empathy, emotional empathy can do this too. We can say, oh, this person is frustrated and I've been frustrated before, I want to support that. But intellectual empathy can do this too. We can say, okay, this person is having a hard time. I'm not having a hard time right now. I like this person, I want to be in support of this person, so I'm going to do what I can. So that is intellectual empathy. It is the lesser forms of all the empathies that I've encountered because it's really imaginary. Intellectual empathy is really imaginary. It doesn't really exist. It's a product of the mind. It spurs actions which are products of the mind. There's no heart really in it. It's not really grounded to anything, so it can take the form of anything. Again, this is often the only form of empathy that people are completely shut down can really accept or experience, because the Matrix has taught us to shut down our emotional bodies and to go cold so that we can be part of the slave system where everyone tortures everyone and everyone tortures everyone, especially if they try to break free and be happy. So that is intellectual empathy. And then before that we had emotional empathy. So then we have, this is the more interesting one that's some people have a hard time comprehending. This is somatic empathy, and this is where we literally experience tangibly within our bodies what other people are feeling. And anybody who's a massage therapist or an energy worker who really, is an inactive practice doing a lot of work just knows this. This is part of our daily lives if we're healers and energy workers who are actively in work, in service. We tangibly feel other people's emotions. I know a lot of people talk about how they're afraid of taking on other people's energies and yada yada, but I think that this is, again, just a fear matrix hoax. I don't think that there's anything to be afraid of working on someone else, because our natural grounding system will take care of this. All we have to do is accept the fact that we are channels for something greater than us and make sure that we're not holding on to anything. The only time we experience symptoms that are other people's when we're healing them is when we hold on to them. So all we have to do is basically get better at our personal practice. If we can meditate and we can let go of things, if we can process trauma from our past, then other people's emotions aren't going to hurt us at all when we're working on them. When they are in a very receptive state, then they're just not going to bother us. Every once in a while, if we need to remind ourselves to let go, we can do that. This should be an important part of everyone's healing practices, no matter what modality you use. Check in with yourself and say, am I letting go of all the emotions that are coming up in this? Probably not all the emotions are mine, so I probably don't want to be attached to them. So again, somatic empathy is when we literally experience other people's emotions in our body. So when someone has a lot of pain in a certain area and we are either drawn to that area instantly or feel it in our body, feel the heat and the sensation as we're touching that area or as we're putting our attention into that area, or literally feeling in our body. Somatic empathy is often more about the energetic waves than the more solid waves of tangible dis-ease, so people's present emotions will be much more experienced. If someone is very agitated, we will feel agitated if we are a somatic empath. If someone is very sad, we will start to tear up no matter what. If someone is very angry, we will become angry and trying to find a solution, frustrated that someone is angry and not communicating why they are angry and what solution they are looking for. It is a heightened state. It is an emergency. We live in a world where emergency states are all the time. People have been conditioned to believe everything is an emergency. This is part of the fear state. If we believe everything is an emergency, we don't have a sense of what truth is or balance is or serenity. We don't have a perspective of time anymore because everything is too urgent. Nothing is urgent. There's very, very, very few things in life that are urgent. Those few things that are urgent, we got to take care of right away and drop everything for. Everything else isn't urgent. It's best to deal with things as soon as you can as they come up, but nothing is really urgent. Eisenhower talked about this, how things that are important are rarely urgent, and things that are urgent are rarely important. This is a great piece of wisdom, by the way. Eisenhower, probably our smartest president, the only president who was able to do a lot of brilliant things and mastermind, parts of infrastructure for this country. No other president I know of who really did anything like this. Most of them were people who were really good at being slave masters. That's really what it took to be a president, to be a leader in the slave system. You have to be really good at enslaving people. That tends to be the main qualification. All right, so that was somatic empathy. This is something, there's a high degree of matrix disbelief for somatic empathy because we all have somatic empathy, and the matrix wants to shut down all of our somatic empathy and tell us it doesn't exist. So people that experience or communicate somatic empathy are the first to be targeted by Mr. Smith. They will say, no, you absolutely do not feel other people's feelings tangibly. That's a lie. That's a myth. That's a hoax. To people like us who experience somatic empathy and who didn't choose to and have been trying to figure out how to deal with it our whole lives, we say, these people who are telling us that our reality isn't real are basically full of shit and programmed by the Matrix and looking to cause pain. They are afraid of something that they don't understand, and they wish it wasn't true because they've been told that it's not true, and they've been told to hate anybody who says it's true because they are so out of touch with who they are. They have to hate anything that reminds them of who they truly are because that's what they've been enslaved to do. This is an intentional slave program. If we look closely at every aspect of modern society, society. We read in between the lines. We're not looking at the main part of it. We're not looking at the body and the title. We're reading in between the lines to see what the laws say, to see what it outlines, to see what it practically means in a day-to-day existence. We can see that empathy has been removed from the human experience in modern culture as much as possible. So somatic empathy, we cannot expect anybody who has been taken over by the Matrix to comprehend somatic empathy. All we can do is confirm that it is real. We can't, be emotional about it because then they'll attack our emotions, and we can't be logical about it because there's no such thing as logic to a lizard brain or a sleeper. There's only emotions. Logic doesn't fit into the picture because emotional slavery is the most powerful form of slavery. And so when people's emotions have been enslaved, then they attach to beliefs. When we no longer have control of our own emotions, we believe in this thing called beliefs, which doesn't really exist. It's not a real thing. It's a way to enslave people. You create a belief system, and then you punish people for not following the belief system. The belief system is the slave system. We are designed to be curious about learning for our whole lives. We're not designed to come up with a system that allows us to stop learning in certain areas. That's madness. That's crazy. Why would we want to enforce ignorance upon ourselves? Anyway, so that is somatic empathy. Again, if we can find ways to communicate somatic empathy to people that trust us, this is really important to spread this information, because we all are somatic empaths. Some people just really don't have a choice, are not allowed to turn it off, while other people have figured out ways to turn it off because they've been whipped and tortured until they turn it off. So somatic empathy. Now we have self-empathy. This is kind of the core of empathy. Until we really have self-empathy, it's very difficult to develop our empathy consciously in other areas. Self-empathy is where we really check in with ourselves and don't hide from ourselves. So to have self-empathy means that we empathize with everything we've been through. So all of our trauma and our darkness, all of the patterns that are destructive, all of the bad things that our parents have done to us that we're still trying to not do to other people, these are all things that self-empathy is able to do. So when we are able to quote-unquote love ourselves, this means that it doesn't mean that we ignore the bad parts of ourselves and say, okay, I'm bad too, that's fine. It's the opposite of this. This is when we dive in and we figure out what's not working with us, what was done to us that we don't want to do to other people. This is self-empathy. This is having the heart space, the strength of heart to be able to go inside to ourselves with empathy and sort through that darkness, sort through that pain, sort through that torture and that conditioning. Self-empathy. It's a really, really big deal, and it is because people have been told that empathy isn't real, there's only intellectual empathy, that people have been conditioned to believe that self-empathy is the devil. People believe that self-empathy is the devil because people are conditioned to worship the devil. So the Matrix says, hey, worship the devil, and what will set you free, we're going to call the devil. So again, the Matrix, like Marco Lepore was saying, basically does a great job of saying that things that are good for us are bad, and things that are really bad for us are in fact the things that we should be wanting in our lives. So self-empathy, going into our darkness, feeling safe and comfortable and strong. We need to be really strong to be able to face our own darkness. Every form of empathy is magnified, clarified, and activated by self-empathy, going in with compassion, but with a blazing sword of righteousness. We're trying to cut through our own shadows, the shadows that have been cast upon us that we have not dispelled yet. Self-empathy is about being a warrior, fighting the darkness within us. All right, so then we have heart empathy. This is when we've resolved enough of our other forms of empathy that we have reached a state where we can explore heart empathy. And I'm not saying that this is just a natural climb a ladder progression and you're there. There's all different steps and all over the places, and the steps go up and down like an MC Escher picture. It's all progress, but it's not all linear. So heart empathy, this is when we are in our heart space, loving curiosity. The heart is all about sustained curiosity and sustained love. It's not about emotion. It's not about transition between emotions. Heart is about sustained curiosity and love. So heart empathy is where we are so gentle and curious and loving. We are so surrendered to curiosity and love that we just gently want to know. We're like, why, love? Why did that happen? I know that was hard for you. I know that was hard for me. Why did I do that? Why did I feel that way? Being really loving and gentle and curious. This is heart empathy. This is fifth dimension. Fourth dimension is persistent curiosity. Fourth dimension is when we no longer want to struggle and fight. We just want to learn more. We want to know why. Heart empathy, fifth dimension, is when we love everything and we want to know. We are in love with everything. Fifth dimension is heart empathy sustained. We are in love and we want to know. Not just do we want to know, we're so used to wanting to know. We're so used to fourth dimension curiosity sustained. And we're so much in our hearts because we've transmuted so much of this darkness and pain and we've confronted ourselves over and over again that we see data everywhere. When we are curious about something, there's no gap in between the curiosity and the learning. We look at a bush, and before we have time to ponder that bush and what it would be like to be that bush, we are already receiving data from that bush on what it's like to be that bush. That bush starts telling us in rich details and maps and overlays. Everywhere we look is all of a sudden joyful data streams coming at us. This is fifth dimensional consciousness. And this is an aspect of heart empathy. This is when our heart, our animus, our aspect of the sun that pumps the warmth and the life through our bodies, that generates the most of our magnetic field, is connecting with the magnetic field and the heart essence of everything around us, and is actively giving and receiving to the point where we are receivers for data streams. We are literally in a holographic world where everything is a neon electronic 3D sign telling us something. The side of a building is telling us about how old the paint is and where the sun was hitting it, and it's full of data. It's telling us how much light is reflecting, the nature of color. Everything we look at is all of a sudden streaming us tons of information. This is fifth dimensional consciousness. So when we look at people in fifth dimensional consciousness, when we use heart empathy around ourselves, we see into ourselves super deep with no illusion, and we see super deep into other people. We are compelled with compassion when we see into other people with heart empathy. We see the blockages. We see everything in ourselves and other people as love and blockages getting in the way of more love, and we don't see anything else. And the only form of frustration that arises in that state of consciousness is, what other blockages have I not surrendered to more of love, curiosity that I'm not seeing yet? So the only form of frustration that exists is, hey, wait a second, why am I slipping out of this higher state of consciousness? And this becomes a great game, because when we've reached this heart space curiosity, this heart empathy, this tells us everything we need to know, and when we're not getting everything we need to know, we know we're not there anymore. So this is a great metric to make sure that we're in the heart empathy. So these are 5 different forms of empathy that I've mapped out, and it's really, really important to study these and practice these. I'm usually not big into names and labels and systems, but this is an area that is so underexplored and so under-talked about and so frequently confused and mixed up, and it's so important to really know what these things are, because they represent different stages of consciousness, and they represent different aspects of being and different states of being. So we really, to be self-analytical and to be making progress with ourselves, we need to be able to label where we're at, when we're at, to tell ourselves where we want to go. Heart empathy is great. Intellectual empathy is, we don't want to confuse the two. We don't want to say, I'm thinking about another person's problem and I'm thinking about how I can help them. We don't want to confuse confuse that with I'm receiving instantaneous data streams about where someone's blockages with their heart are, and I comprehend the only few things that can be of service and facilitate for that person. So the question mark disappears when we are all the way there. There's no more question mark. There's no time. There's no delay in between curiosity and receiving information. So this is why we want to keep on practicing empathy and defining the different forms of empathy. We want to be cautious talking to other people about empathy because it's a trigger. It's been designed. It's something that's so important that the Matrix have designed empathy as a trigger word. So massage therapists who have empathy are suspicious and questionable. People who feel each other's feelings, empaths, are not real. These are statements of the Matrix. We have, science fiction shows which depict empaths in very nonsensical ways to support this belief system. On Star Trek, that depiction of an empath was a psychic. It wasn't even an empath. On Star Trek, the most prominent display of an empath in our culture, there was less empathy than there was psychic ability. This was hearing people's thoughts in their heads and talking to them in their heads. That's a psychic power. Empathetic power is drawing from the emotional experience and overlaying a psychological concept over it to be able to see and gain data from it. When we use our mind based on what our feelings tell us, the two together give us intellectual empathy. Empathy by itself, emotional empathy by itself, just tells us what people are feeling, so we really have to refine our intellect to get all the way there. All right, well, I gotta go. I hope you all have a wonderful morning.